Good evening. Welcome everybody. My name is Anju Gupta from Ivy Camp, and hope everybody's doing well in this new environment, new world, new circumstances. Just to give you a little bit of background about the webinar. The Imagine webinar, this is the third episode we're now running. It was launched by Ivy Cap Ventures. And Ivy Cap Ventures was founded in 2011 as a fund to foster entrepreneurship and invest in high potential entrepreneurs. And we have two key focuses. One is we have a very focused mentor model because we believe in working with our portfolio companies to help them grow, help expand by partnering with the relevant domain experts. And we also believe in a give back program, so which is what we work with our global alumni network to give back to the startup ecosystem. And then a couple of years ago, we launched Ivy Camp as an online engagement platform for early stage entrepreneurs. And we work with institutes, incubators, accelerators, corporates to help early stage companies grow and expand. The idea behind the Imagine webinar series was to basically engage with global business leaders and investors to help us, imagine and be creative about what some of the new opportunities are in this post-COVID environment and how can we address some of these ongoing challenges. So today we have a great panel of experts and we're going to pick their brains a little bit to discuss how we can navigate this post-COVID situation through digital transformation and through innovative solutions. We have an awesome moderator, Ms. Rama Vedashri, who is the CEO of the Data Security Council of India, who will moderate the panel and introduce the panelists. Just one quick note on logistics. We'll have a discussion for about 40-45 minutes and then open it up for Q&A. If you could send all your questions through the chat, and we will pass them through to the speakers that way. So again, welcome everybody. Looking forward to a great discussion. Rama, over to you.
So thank you. First of all, it's the first time we are hosting a webinar jointly with the Ivy Cap Ventures and the Ivy Camp team, and she already talked about it. And this is the third in their series of webinars, and I'm glad that Ivy Cap chose to give attention to overall digital and cybersecurity and host this webinar. I have an excellent panel. First of all, I have Swapnendu Mohanty, who's representing, he's a Chief FinTech Officer in a global regulator, Monetary Authority of Singapore. I have a young entrepreneur and a cybersecurity startup company CEO, Sahir Udayatila from Smokescreen. We also have a CTO and COO from National Stock Exchange. He should be joining any moment, Mr. Basin. And of course, we have Anju from the Ivy Camp. I mean, typically an eclectic panel like this, I have Sahir representing the young innovative innovation ecosystem from India, represents the security startup ecosystem. We have a regulator who, sitting in Singapore, has been spearheading a lot around regulation and partnering with the fintech innovation ecosystem. Also probably a regulator who's very keen to regulate the sector so that the cybersecurity preparedness and preparedness for data protection goes up and also adopt cutting edge new technology solutions. We have an enterprise CTO and a COO, right? Mr. Basin will be joining us very soon, and Anju, an investor. I mean, an ecosystem like this in the current pandemic world. Welcome, Shiv Kumar Basi. We just started off. So we have a CTO, COO combination who's all set to adopt innovation and probably also cut the checks, or maybe cutting the check is out of vogue, maybe doing wire transfers to the young deep tech startups and security startups. And a regulator who also represents the overall regulator ecosystem in Asia Pacific, and probably in line with what regulators in India are also looking at. How can we have regulations which enable the innovation ecosystem and boost the cybersecurity preparedness? So we, can't expect a better panel than this. Before we get into specific, discussion points, overall in this current COVID situation, with the kind of economic downturn we may be witnessing, and probably business spending on technology may be contracting or going flat. Overall, do we see a challenge in focus on innovation and focus on investments in security, investments in digital? Or do we think that actually the investor ecosystem and also the customers who are betting on digital transformation to be able to get themselves up for the new normal, or as I would say, the next normal? Do you think actually the reverse will happen, that there will be more adoption of digital and more willingness and more need to invest more in deep tech? Swapnendu?
Thanks for having me, Rama. This one thing this pandemic has done, it definitely has done a job which most CIOs have not done, is get things accelerated faster in when it comes to digital transformation. So in a way, pandemic is a extension of CIO's desire to make things go faster in this space. So we should thank some way pandemic has made us more relevant in this space as before pandemic. Now, the point you laid out, that will there be more digitization? Absolutely. Absolutely, there'll be more digitization, and there'll be more demand for the market to adopt new technology. As we say, during pandemic, post-pandemic, it'll be a low-touch, high-tech economic construct because the social distancing will still remain in force in some sense. It will not be the old-time massive influx of people moving from A place to B place. There will be that distance being maintained. I think we need technology to do trade. So that's given. If one number, if one way to understand this, given Anju is an investor, representing investors community here, last year in the Singapore's fintech ecosystem, we had $1.2 billion new investment in this sector. It's a small country compared to India, so number may not be that big, but it's 1.2 billion for a small country is a lot of money for a small sector called fintech, with a very small set of portfolio. And March this year, I was quite worried because as COVID was becoming a definite narrative, the total investment month to date in March was around $30 to $40 million. By June, we touched $650 million. So there was a massive jump in this last 3 months or post-March, is because a lot of investors started putting money behind fintechs who are in the business of digitizing banks, who are in the business of digitizing SMEs, who are in the business of providing market infrastructure so that we can get the digital process far more entrenched in our trade. So if you look at the market signal, definitely it was the market prediction is they're going to fund more of fintechs, more of these companies who are in business of digitizing the services, product, and help the companies to recover post-pandemic. So that's the other one way to looking at it. And the third way, if I can end my intervention, is the regulator's view. One of the most worrisome discussion before pandemic was the rising data protection. And it would have come as a massive challenge as we think about cross-border expansion for a lot of tech companies who are also in the business of servicing the client. But during pandemic, it became quite evident that we should have far more stronger collaboration in managing data. And that means that we should have a faster policy making around how countries can come together, manage data flow more efficiently with better governance, while keeping in mind that a key ingredient of post-COVID-19 recovery is data flow, and how to make it work becoming a big policy topic as we speak. And I hope what comes out of pandemic is that we'll have a far more thoughtful and far more engaging and meaningful data policy.
Thank you, Swapnendu. Shiv Kumar, you are the CTO and the CEO of the National Stock Exchange, had a long stints in the banking sector. So overall in the BFSI sector in India or globally, as you engage with peers in other countries in Asia Pacific or Middle East or anywhere, what do you think are the changing priorities in the post-pandemic world of a CIO, CRO, CISO? What are boards in the BFSI sector demanding from their CIOs?
Actually, very demanding opportunity. A lot of priorities are changing definitely, but I agree with Swapnendu what he mentioned about that. This pandemic has really changed the priorities for the head of the organization. Before the CIO, CDO, or CTO, any one CXO, which are technology terms, but the head of organizations have got their priorities changed, which is the major driver again for the CIOs who have been singing the song of digitization, innovation, and fintech engagements. They are coming or they are getting addressed much more, fulfilling way, much more enthusiastic way. The boards are accepting these ideas after now they have seen that unless the business processes are digitally enabled, what are the issues are there with respect to running the day-to-day processes. If businesses are digitally enabled, they can run the process smoothly even from remote working, because the virtual workspace and work from home technologies are making the people enable to run operations from anywhere. And those operations can be run from anywhere unless the business processes are not digitally enabled. It will not happen. So first thing has come to all the various businesses that each and every process, they have to go for digitization. And hence, I see that there is a post-pandemic, there will be a very planned way of fintech and innovation adoption. And even now, some of the people have already started moving towards it slowly. I know that fintechs are, quite anxious during this time. Lot of queries or a lot of POCs which they have been doing, they might have come down, but the road is quite, on a brighter side. And when we look at within NSE itself, we have launched a very large digital transformation program, and where we are working around close to 7 or 8 fintechs already for various kinds of APIs on the cloud and various kinds of data validations and various kinds of OCR, RPA, AI analytics. So, and data warehouse on cloud. So on various things, we are working with a lot of startups in this direction. And these all programs have started during this COVID time, because a lot of businesses have identified that unless these processes are made online and paperless, and where less and lesser human interaction, and more self-service driven, we will not be able to digitize them. And similar trend I am observing even across the globe for the other CTOs and CIOs of the global exchanges as well. They are already speaking about the cloud adoption at a consortium of the exchange CTO CIOs. The cloud policy is being formed, and they are trying to make the processes much more cloud friendly, so that the policies to be cloud friendly, so that a lot of innovations can be brought into the capital market business. Then when we look at the CROs, definitely CROs are worried as the digitization is growing. So they are emphasizing more on the right level of controls being adopted while doing the digitization, while taking the business processes or data to the cloud. But some of the moderate CROs you will find, or other CROs are finding that even the cloud-based security is a better option, because they, rather than bringing the risk at a perimeter of your own organization, if you can stop the risk at a cloud level. So there are a lot of startups and a lot of innovative solutions are made available by the fintechs for cloud-based security, whether it is a DNS, whether it is a work from home solutions or remote working solutions, which are cloud-based. And they have all the multi-factor authentications, biometric-based multi-factor authentication, all put in place as well. So there is a, I would say that optimism is very high, even in the CRO stage, stage as well. Then going to the definitely CDOs and data organizations are always were actually missing this before, that as more and more innovators will come in this post-COVID time, and as more processes will get digitized, the more data will come in, and they will be able to in their large data lake solutions or going for the cloud-based data warehouse solutions, they will be able to come up with a much better insights, which will be adding value to the organization, and those value additions will bring the larger revenues to the organization as well. So hence, when I said initially, the MDs of the organizations are now becoming more and more aware that which used to think that work from home is not a reality in India. And now it has proven that, most of the organizations across India are enabled for work from home. So consequently, now they think next ladder is that capturing all the business processes data and how to make them, generating the money or revenue out of that, as well as bringing the innovations with the new fintechs, new age fintechs.
So that's nice, reassuring to hear that every CXO in a large enterprise is betting on digital, is now more open to evaluate cloud or adopt cloud. And most importantly, you talked about how even NSE is looking at partnering with startups and fintechs. That's wonderful to hear. Now I come to a friend and industry colleague, Sahir. Sahir, first of all, kudos to the entire security product and services ecosystem in India, which I think the scale, work from home at scale transition that happened in and from India to serve the global customers, right? I think the security industry was really the backbone. It really demonstrated business resilience. So I think we really scaled up to be able to serve all enterprises, essential services, government in India, but all the customers that we serve across all your peer organizations and the larger services industry. Now, in this pandemic world, and as you start gearing up for your long-term business strategy, do you see new opportunities for the innovation ecosystem from India? And also, do you see the need for new business models? And how are you, when you work with your team, or you work with your investors, how are you trying to reinvent yourself?
Rama, they're all great questions. I think the first step is the cybersecurity industry itself has become fairly resilient to these sort of changes. In fact, it's one of the sectors that is currently growing. And Anju may not like me for saying this, but there's a VC who once said that cybersecurity startups are cockroaches. We just don't die, because the second we have trouble, we can pivot to services, and there's such a shortfall of good talent that it's typically fairly easy for us to stay alive, right? So from that perspective, I think the opportunity in the industry sector definitely exists. I'm quite happy that I'm, not in the travel business at the moment. I'm quite happy I'm in cybersecurity. I think to the next part, the nice thing that startups have is the ability to be agile is really what, we keep talking about as a cliche. It would be foolish to assume that nothing has changed. And if stuff has changed, then you have to, you've got to turn on a dime. And there are tremendous opportunities. I'm a perennial optimist, so I like to look for the positives, right? So the way I see it, and I'll take my reality, typically most of my competition would sell with, field sales, guys in suits, paying for expensive events, et cetera, which is a difficult way to kind of, it can be difficult to compete. Now the whole situation has flipped. There are no events, so their marketing has suddenly shrunk. There's no field sales, so those guys in suits are sitting twiddling their thumbs. On the flip side, if you could enable your business to say deliver anywhere, deliver from the cloud, which we did, we got lucky. We didn't see it coming, but in October or so, we completely switched to a cloud delivered model, subscription OpEx driven model, which is easier to consume. And so now what we've been doing is we've been doubling down on the ability for our sales teams to master the art of inside sales, completely shifting our budgets over to digital marketing. There are folks who are cutting back their digital marketing budgets because they're not really sure how to succeed at things like content marketing and inbound marketing. So I think tremendous opportunities exist, and the advantage of startups is that they're able to turn on a dime. The founders can sit down, have a chat about it, and figure out a way to do it. The problem for startups is essentially the lack of predictability of business. You're not able to, even if you were running solidly, you probably can't predict your quarters as well as you used to be able to. And if you were heavily backed, bad unit economics, you're probably in trouble because your runway to do those experiments, is not much, right? Say you fail at inside sales and you need to redo it, you don't have much runway, right? The VC community has been very supportive. I've actually received more VC interest post-pandemic than I did before, because many of them are rebalancing portfolios. They're saying, the pandemic brutally is going to reduce inefficiencies. So there are going to be inefficient organizations who are going to be weeded out, and they're going to have to put that capital somewhere, right? That money has to be invested. So they're going to look for places where there's solid unit economics, cash flow positive businesses, great product market fit, ability to scale globally, cloud delivered models. These are all kind of sweet spot things that, we've been hearing. So, I'm pretty bullish on, being a cybersecurity startup. If you fall into these buckets, if you're in, cybersecurity, selling hardware, traditional field sales, events for marketing, and you hadn't found product market fit, you probably won't see, August of next year or September of next year.
Yeah. Thanks, Sahir. A key takeaway from both what Shiv Kumar and Sahir talked about is a lot of enterprises are now beginning to bet on cloud. And we are also seeing a growing trend where consuming security stack and products out from a cloud delivered model. And it's good that a lot of our Indian security startups, the products that they're building, or not only the new versions, but what they've already built, are either already cloud ready, and maybe some of them are only cloud only or cloud first kind of a products. So I think that is something that's really going to help them sustain the growth, because I think cloud delivered model is probably a prereq now to be able to succeed in the next few months and next few years. That's a good thing. Anu, as you talk to your peers in the industry, at least we are seeing a lot of traction and interest from angel investors and also mature global VC companies and organizations like Ivy Camp. Showing a lot more interest, probably the reports that DSCI generates, whether it's on the security services industry product. We recently launched a report on work from home startup solutions. There's a lot of interest and, coming back to us seeking clarifications. So are you seeing a positive trend where there would be a little more, interest in deep tech startups and the cybersecurity startups? Is that what you're hearing?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I would also agree with what Sahir is saying. It's one of those silver lining things, where there have been certain sectors of the industry in the startup world that, have just gone downhill. I think deep tech specifically, when you're looking at artificial intelligence, you're looking at blockchain, you're looking at robotics, and now, cybersecurity. I think till maybe 18 months ago, cybersecurity was still, from an investor's point of view, something that was important, but, we'll wait and watch. So now there's a lot more interest in that. Also, what's interesting is, we also work with a lot of corporates, who are wanting, like Sahir said, to work with startups that are agile, ready, have solutions to go. So a lot of the interest we're getting from them is also on startups which have AI, automation solutions, which have robotics, things that can go online, supporting SaaS solutions. So, all that also feeds into the investor interest, because obviously from an investor point of view, it's not just investing and letting go, it's investing and seeing what startups can succeed. in. So a lot of these portfolio companies that are not only looking at seed stage, but also Series A, Series B, Series C, that corporate interest in solutions and kind of working with them, being more open to them, plus the added, insight that, this is the way to go. This is not just something that's going to come and go. Work from home, a lot of companies are now getting more used to it. Data is flowing like never before. E-tailing is growing so much more. So both these online automated solutions that are reducing touch points, plus cyber security to protect data, data analytics to understand more consumer behavior. Now you no longer have consumers coming in the store; it's all online. So how do I understand how my new consumers are behaving? There are a lot more consumers doing online e-tailing. So all that is really adding to the interest. But now what it also means that there's a lot more scrutiny, and I think a lot more of the cream of the crop of startups is now going to flow, to the top in terms of people who really understand what they're doing and really have solutions that can add value, especially to corporate organizations.
So actually, it's validated when I think the recent data point that if you look at the growth in online shoppers since the lockdown, I think in the tier 1 cities was about 73%, whereas in tier 2, tier 3, it's more than 400%. And similarly, adoption of EdTech and applications for education and learning. And hopefully this is a long-term change because its users' behavior and preferences is going to change because it's not a 15 days, 2-month scenario. People are getting used to it for 5 months, 6 months. And I think this behavior of consuming online services is here to stay in both in, the tier 1 plus rural India is at least what I believe is going to be a trend that would sustain. So Pnendu, I have a couple of questions. You could, combine both of them and respond to it. One is, as a regulator sitting in Singapore, as you engage with other geographies in the Asia Pacific, what is it that needs to be done to make sure that this innovative ecosystem, whether it's fintech or cybersecurity startups, see sustainable growth and make profits? Second, again, sitting there, you look at, other geographies. What do you think needs to be done to move India from particularly in the tech world, from a services to a product and platform-led economy?
Very good question, Rama. In fact, I've been championing this cause that a lot of, I'm not pointing to Anju as an investor here. A lot of investors have generally been very lazy in understanding the B2B market, because it requires deep understanding of the technology itself. It also needs a lot of patience. It's not a 2-year cycle. You do a math of number of online customers, and you do a multiplier impact, and you do a sense of valuation. This is a long game. The investor must have a lot of patience behind a product company, 5 to 8 years. Look for the top 5 client. Have a long process and partnership to fund this product companies. So betting on B2B is to me is a missing piece in India's tech ecosystem. Whether it's a cyber tech company or it is a B2B fintech company, investors are still staying away from them, primarily because of perhaps there's a return pressure on this in a short 3 to 4 years time. There's a lack of appetite for a long-term holding. So getting the priorities shifted to a B2B fintech would be one of my suggestion for the market to be more sustainable, and perhaps it creates a more long-term from a fintech community perspective. It creates a much better diversification, because betting on B2C alone has got the market cycle impact. You can get in the wrong cycle, means everything you have put gone to the other side. So putting behind money behind B2B product companies is definitely a good diversification strategy, but that needs a lot of education, a lot of support from investor community, and a lot of support strangely from regulators, because as a financial regulator, we do impose banks a certain restriction on which technology provider they're working with, and most of the there's a regulation called Tech Risk Management Guidelines, which I'm sure exchanges also have to go through. Is that they would expect a bank to have a technology which is well tested for over 10 years. Now a startup out there which is just build a technology for 2 years, they chance no way to fight against a mandate which makes banks to only buy technology from a company which is more than 10-year-old. So how do we create a regulatory framework which allows banks to buy technology from a 2-year-old company, for an exchange to buy technology from a 1-year-old company? What should be that framework to allow such product to be bought into this sector, which, by the way, pays the bill of most tech companies? Look at the revenue of all the tech companies. 40 to 50%, I can bet, is coming from financial sector. And if they are paying the bills, I'm sure they can shift some of the banks can shift some of the spending to small tech companies, small product companies. And that's where they perhaps have to work with the regulators to bring that ecosystem together, because working with a small company, with a new product company, you definitely increase your chance of being more innovative. You increase your chance of getting to new tech stacks faster than usual. So that's one piece. On a other way to look at is that one of the challenges we are also facing is the flip side, that if an institution has to work with so many tech companies, there's another fear monger out there, which is right to Rama's your space, is the cyberspace. Because suddenly they wake up and say, you know what, you're working with so many companies, how do you manage the cybersecurity? Who's going to govern all the 30 product companies you're working with? Forget about work with one company, build a better cyber structure so that you don't have to spend time in governing 30 companies. So then how do the cyber side of the narrative becomes far more stronger, so that there are tools and product which helps to allow many flowers to bloom in this market. So there's a need for that side of narrative to get also stronger and be more supportive to this building ecosystem. Third, on the policy and from the government policy side, during the crisis in Singapore, we put together a funding grant which supported any fintech who gets a bank client in Asia. We are willing to back with $80,000 of funding the POC as a way to incentivize banks from a regulatory perspective, signaling the banks, if you work with a fintech, I'm going to give some state capital to fund these POCs. It gives 2 or 3 impact. First thing, it promotes banks to adopt small fintech, B2B fintech. It also promotes innovation. It also promotes regulatory signaling that they're willing to support such new ecosystem being getting developed. So these are the few things which I would suggest is a way to look forward. So India is a huge market, a lot of talent base, but unfortunately, if you go to any WhatsApp group of India's fintech WhatsApp group, dominant narrative is payments and lending. That's it. There's no narrative for B2B companies. So time to fix it, time to move forward.
Rama, you are on mute actually.
The B2B tech startups, it's not just fintechs. I think even the cybersecurity startups, health tech startups, as long as it is B2C, I think they get a lot of investor attention. But the B2B tech startups, I think we still have a long way to go. I'm glad you raised this point about procurement preferences of large enterprises. I think it's still, they're very risk averse to work with startups. I think the one big turnkey SI or a turnkey, service provider is a preference. We've been working on, changing this behavior. I think the regulator attention to how do you encourage startups is a big problem. It's problem in government, it's problem in the public sector enterprises, and also in most large enterprises. I think globally, this has been a challenge, but we have seen some geographies open up and put structures in place. I think we still have a lot more to do I think Ministry of Electronics and IT as a policy to encourage startups. But how do you operationalize this when RFPs are floated, when actually evaluation happens? I think we still have a long way to go.
Rama, you pick any RFP, look at the ask. I think 80% of B2B startup, 90% will not make it.
Yeah, absolutely. Shiv Kumar, as you in the BFSI world, particularly since you have a CTO's role, do you see possibilities of more co-creation opportunities where a large enterprise is going to incubate or partner with startups to look at a problem, co-create a solution, and then allow that startup not only to deploy it for that particular enterprise, but take it to the market in India or global? Do you see that happening? I do see many of the organizations having an innovation agenda and maybe having a small scale incubator in-house where they do give that opportunity. But do you see, particularly in the BFSI world, which has always led the technology wave in every country, do you see co-creation with startups happening?
Uh, Actually, I see that in pockets. What you are, telling, whether any bank has, or any large bank, or any bank has worked, or any financial institution, well-established financial institution has worked with some startup and came up with a new platform or a product. Uh, I see very few examples. Some of the examples actually have not been, done in a very well. Have not gone in a very good direction. Like one was Yono, although it was not again, I was just SBI Buddy. I wanted to mention about the one of the wallet platform which we have created in SBI days. So that was again between the three very large enterprises without naming them. But they were, one was a tech services and one was, the kind of payment vertical, very renowned vendor. But the when you look at the eventual, kind of a incubation, co-creation kind of a coming coming up with a platform, that maturity was missing in the the partnership or in the vision. Uh, Initial startup vision was there, but how to execute in the longer run, that got totally missed out. And similarly, I find that thing, going into the some of the other examples as well, that wherever people have tried to work and it has not gone very well. But in NSE now, what we are doing, that we are not we are taking the example of that where you don't set up your fintech innovation center and you call the fintechs to come in and then work with them, try to co-create with them, and then maybe consume their services or do not consume, and maybe they go and get their services or platforms being sold outside this relationship, or this out of this innovation or incubation center. But that I think has not been, we have not seen, like there was a last 3 years or 4 years, there have been a lot of boom in this kind of a model. Now what we have adopted in NSE, that rather than, and again we are from capital markets background, so rather than asking them to co-create, sit with us, looking there at idea, funding their idea as an investor, and telling them that these are the use cases, and consuming some of the use cases as an example within NSE as well. And at the same time, putting really, not just kind of a, you open an innovation center, people are coming, you have given them some space and some kind of a Gyan or knowledge center, people, various business folks are giving them. But here we invest money really, that okay, whatever X percentage of money has been put up into the startup, and we work on a long-term relationship with them. So that is the model we are adopting, and we have invested into some of the fintechs, which I can't name in this call actually, but we are using that model actually, number one.
No, and that too, if large enterprises are looking at investing in startups, they don't really need to physically incubate. I think that's a great positive trend, and a lot of them have these R&D funds or innovation funds. If that can be moved towards startups, I think that's a great direction.
The second part which you are asking about, I think whether B2B platform, although I know that there is you must have been knowing that RBI is now setting up a competition to NPCI. That is a B2B platform, NUE, which is going to come up. So I'm pretty sure, I think a lot of the fintechs right now who have a lot of innovative ideas. So this new platform, when it comes up, I'm sure that we will not be able to, address the complaint of Swapnendu that only payments and lending. I think those are the two things definitely will come out from new platform as well. But there are going to be much more innovative solutions are going to come up, because they will not be having any kind of a locking like a public sector, non-profit sector kind of a thing, because they will be the profit-making company. So definitely they will go for a various innovations. So that is one, I think, great idea, which is, I think, our regulator is also setting up, number one. And then there is a, not, I think India is now, especially in the COVID era, has picked up the edutech. So education technology is really, I think, thriving. Even in NSC, I will tell you that we have invested into the exam business, remote exam conduct business. We have set up a platform. We have our technology arm, and we have set up a platform where any kind of exams can be set up, remotely can be executed. And we are now looking at diversifying for taking it to even from primary schools to the, universities. So it is so far for the professional exams and all only. So I think there are sectors which are emerging due to COVID, and there are many B2B platforms are emerging like that.
Sahir, whenever we talk to investors from DSCI end, or now Swapnendu talked about it, that a large enterprise does not want to deal with, may not be 30 product companies, maybe let's say 10 product companies. So do you see a need? Because even when we talk to a large VC firm, they say, can you present a portfolio of companies which can be an integrated security stack rather than we look at one by one, So do you see the need now that some of the mature security product companies and startups need to figure out a joint go-to-market and collaborate together so that you can, access new markets or reach out to customer, or even present yourself jointly to an investor? At the same time, I would like a follow-up answer also from Swapnendu. Do you see the startups from India fitting into the global supply chain, given all the geopolitical thing? Over first, Sahir.
So I think the idea of unified stack of cybersecurity solutions, which are both technically integrated and brought to market jointly, has its place. There have been many initiatives. DSCI has led some attempts to get those done as well, and some of us, who have joint use cases, have tried to do this. And I think it'll work. I think it's probably easier to do coupling of a couple of solutions around a larger use case. I think the larger problem in cybersecurity is there are many point solutions. So what tends to happen is somebody solves something which might just be a feature of the larger problem. So that will definitely happen. The problem has been going to market jointly has typically been difficult. The problem is that for startups, you're usually focused on your dollar, right? Even if there's $2 together with somebody else, that's less in your control. So there was a really interesting conversation I had with a PE who was trying to do a roll-up of a few cybersecurity startups. I think it was a year and a half ago. And what they wanted to do was the whole pitch was, why isn't there a global cybersecurity giant out of India, right? Which covers a bunch of stuff, right? Why isn't there a McAfee or Symantec, or well, maybe now those may not be the go-to names, right? And I think that space will come, but I think it's more likely to be this combination of services and product ecosystem getting married together. Obviously, I've been purely products, but I think that one of the biggest challenges in cybersecurity is the people angle. And the idea that I want to do more with this technology is interlinked to the idea of I don't have people, I don't have resources, I don't have bandwidth or skill set to do this. So that marriage of security services, but very, very tightly integrated into a product ecosystem, not just the typical SI relationship where the SI just bombards you with 20 products and then they claim they have someone who can do something with it, right? I think that's definitely going to happen. It's already succeeded in the West. You can see leading cybersecurity companies like, for example, CrowdStrike, right? They have a very large services practice. You have the managed detection and response companies who bring a tech stack, and then they bring the people to manage it. So I think there's definitely a place for that. The marriage of two technology companies is difficult, more because everybody's walking their own path. I'm very hopeful it'll happen. And it's the funny part is it's already working. I mean, for example, NSE has been very engage with the cybersecurity startup community. There's quite a few folks who work integrated there. Some of the top banks have done the same thing. So the use cases are proved out. It's actually working. I think it's more the onus on the startups to actually figure ourselves out and say, okay, let's tie our legs together and walk this journey together.
Okay. Swapnendu, do you see the entire Indian tech startups and security startups plugging into a global supply chain? Given
Yes.
all the developments on the geopolitical side, do you think we are at a better advantage to access global markets now?
And I would say that India is always there. I think there is a huge source of technology services coming out of India. I think there are some changes which has happened. I think India has to recognize that. Few things. There's a rise of small, medium enterprise and micro SMEs and their desire to connect globally point to point. Because of technology, it is now possible. So earlier, if you think of supply chain, they're actually aggregating many small sub-suppliers and sub-suppliers, and they come together, a big supplier who then talks to somebody overseas. So they're aggregating suppliers to get to a sizable trade. But with the advent of new platforms coming in out of Singapore, also there are a couple of platforms called Proxtera, Business Sans Border, where they are trying to connect a small entrepreneur from, let's say, from a home state in Odisha. If somebody wants to sell filigree work, silver work from Cuttack, and if there's a demand for in Singapore, do they have to go through 3-4 layers of aggregated supplier to get that trade? No, you don't need to, because there are platform coming where both buyer and supplier can connect. But the challenge is that both that ecosystem needs a lot of digital tools to be made available so that they can do the trade. So, and this is only one example. And due to various political reasons of decoupling and all these things, you will see a more distributed supply chain market now, which means there'll be huge demand in plugging in a lot of digital tools for this growing distributed market. Now, the thing I would not advise, I would suggest that if Indian B2B product companies, they must try to be very sensitive. At least they must understand that whatever they do in a market, let's say in ASEAN, they must find a way to serve the market, the domestic market of that country in a way which adds real value to the country. Whether they're helping the country to grow, helping the country to create more jobs. Because one thing you would have you have seen through many articles, every country is going to also start not only data nationalism, also job nationalism. That you want to have your own people having jobs. So there'll be all this challenges of pandemic coming out. So I think we got to find a way that startups, when they go work with a partner in some market, they must do something good for the country. They must add value to the local economy. If they do that, I think there's a bigger chance for our product to be plugged into those markets. And the third aspect is get investors behind you. I think one of the things I would request strong that there has to be a sustainable group of investors who are willing to bet behind this sector. And if they come along, there's a right policy support, I think definitely Indian product company and service, especially in the B2B space, digitizing supply chain market will stand to succeed. But one good thing is, due to pandemic, it's not a long period of time to succeed. You have a 2 to 3 years window where you can capture the market and go for it. And if you lose this window, I think you have to wait for another decade to catch up. Till that time, you're still a service company. Whereas a country with providing a lot of software services, very little product.
Yeah, I like that point that once you start doing business in a country, other than your own business and profit interests, you need to be seen to be contributing to the local economy and society, and of course job creation. I think that's now an expectation from any government and in any market that you work on.
Absolutely.
I think we'll take some questions and then maybe we can have a wrap up. There's a question around what would be the top 2 concerns for an enterprise. Right, 1 second. I'm just going back to the question. So they're talking about what are the top 2 concerns for an enterprise in the today's situation post-COVID, and would there be some more government programs to support cybersecurity startups? Anyone? No, Shiv Kumar, would you like to take that?
I was reading the chat, So can you please repeat the question? Sorry, I got distracted.
No, the question was, what are the top 2 concerns today an enterprise should be concerned about in the post-COVID world? And would there be some more government policies to support startups? Maybe the government one I can answer because we engage deeply with government.
Right.
At an enterprise level, what would be the top 2 concerns?
See, at an enterprise level, the top 2 concerns are, I would say, one that how the processes need to be digitized, which infer into couple of things. One, that if the organization is using legacy technologies and legacy architectures, so how to go to the modern application architecture, modern stack, and going for those all the container driven or cloud ready applications. So that is one of most of the organizations concerns, that how to be future ready, how to be that is one very big concern. And that arises only when they start thinking that they have to digitize their processes, because for supporting digitization they have to do the modernization of the technologies in those organizations. Second is that which is that how to again which is we call it a digitization of the infrastructure, we call it, or we say the software enabled infrastructure. So which is software driven data centers. So it is very, very important now that unless the organizations move to the complete software driven infrastructure, they will not be cloud ready as well eventually. And so these are the 2 very important concerns, and these lead towards even the cyber security, as we are discussing. That becomes like one of the area where once you have this, you will naturally put that my perimeter level security, some of the perimeter level security elements should be directly on the cloud, so that so these are the 3 main concerns, I will say, which every organization will have, who has a desire to probably live next 10 years, or I think otherwise they are probably sooner going to die.
Sure.
Rama,
so, I mean, to answer the, yeah.
Rama, quickly on this, I was thinking one of the way policy or the government can do, maybe help the sector, is to incentivize adoption of technology by small entities. And there should be financial incentive or a tax incentive, some kind of incentive to promote adoption of technology. And I think that if that can be done, I think it can help in a long way to create a market between supply and demand.
That's a good point. I think from a government policy, the policies are there for promotion of startups. DIPP has it, the government e-marketplace has it. But operationalizing that in every RFP, I think, is a challenge and is a long haul exercise for that.
Demand side incentive.
Demand side, yeah. There's a question around, maybe Sahir can take this, or even Swapnendu can add it later, saying there are a lot of B2B security startups. There's a question here. And they're saying they have the solution, they have the use case, but a lot of startups, struggle to have the fit for the product and a particular market that they're trying to serve, right? Because in each market, large enterprise, small and medium enterprise, maybe the fit of the product to the market. So they want to know, is there any tips to overcome product market fit exercise, which probably most startups struggle to do? Sahir, any inputs from your experience?
Yeah, I think we underestimate what product market fit is. We think product market fit is you've solved a particular use case, you can detect a particular threat, or you can block a particular thing, right? And usually technical minded founders like myself tend to view it from that lens. I think what we lose sight of is the fact that product market fit can be much broader. You might not be in the running, in a global market or even in the Indian market, right? If you don't have the necessary enterprise features, you don't have, two-factor authentication in your product, you don't have audit trails, you don't have all those things that make you enterprisey. at which point you're presented with two options. Either you go out and you build them and you understand that not everything is about the features of what you're trying to solve. You go and build those other things that are essentially prerequisites to being considered enterprise software, which is difficult, it's time consuming. Or the other option is you find somebody who really loves that use case that you solve. So I believe it's really important, if you're not getting that traction, to find that one small group of people that love you so much that they are ready to take that chance and say, I don't care if you don't have SNMP monitoring or something, right? You'll get there, but I love what you do so much. It saves me so much money, saves me so much time, makes me so much money, etc., that I'm ready to give you a shot, right? That's point one. If you reach that point, then the bigger problem that we have, and I think that's probably more what the question is going for, is your go-to-market strategy. It's one thing to say, yes, I know how to sell to one person on founder-driven sales. I know how to sell to 5 people on founder-driven or core team sales. How do you sell to 500 people? And many startups, especially the bootstrap startups, we don't necessarily have the experience of figuring that out. A VC-backed startup, they're going to force you to do it, right? Otherwise, they're just going to not give you more money. But basically, how do you ramp sales and marketing? How do you get a cookie cutter sales process? How do you ensure that you can access those markets? The great thing is, it's never been easier. You can market cheaper to say the US is your target market. You can market cheaper to the US today than you could ever have marketed any time in the past, using the distribution power of the internet. You can sell better because now people don't need to see you. They can, sit in a Zoom, right? So I see tremendous opportunities. If you believe you have product market fit, there's no excuse for you being not able to access the market. There'll be a guy in Luxembourg who will want to buy your product if you've got product market fit, and you can reach him.
Yep, I particularly, endorse the last point that you said, Sahil. There was apparently a very big RFP from an aviation regulator in the Middle East, and all the bidders were expecting it to be deferred, whereas they did end-to-end evaluation presentations by all the vendors who proposed to that RFP, completely online, and the cycle time to close the evaluation, and maybe probably, I'm sure by now they would have selected the vendor. Everything happened virtually, and the entire cycle time was actually cut down. Even one of the very senior lady from the angel investor community, she was saying that their due diligence time to decide a yes or no to cut an investment deal is actually shrunk, because they're just getting on a call. Before it was about flying down to Bangalore or flying down to Mumbai or wherever the startup was, then meeting them, doing the pitch session. I think all of that is cutting down. I think we are almost at the end of time, but any closing comments on what organizations like DSCI or NASSCOM should do to change investor customer preferences to support more tech startups? Anyone who has a closing comment?
Let me give you one thing. I think the startup community needs a lot of handholding, and I don't mean handholding means they need like babysitting. I think they need a lot of policy support. They need what I call risk capital. They need a lot of risk capital to back them, and I think there has to be some kind of cultural training for a lot of founders and product developers, that when they go overseas, they must appreciate the local market, not only from a product perspective, but also the local culture perspective, what they can contribute better. I think more we are empathetic to the local needs, overseas needs, better we are in our product positioning. And that's a key set part in current scenario. You've got to be deeply empathetic to everybody you sell, every market you go. It cannot be that I come, I sell, I go away. It's not going to work.
Yeah, one thing I would add is,
good point,
in deep tech, more than any before, I think startups really need a strong ecosystem. I mean, one of the things we miss in deep tech is having some really good technical leaders who can support you. When it comes to AI, when it comes to cybersecurity, there are very few technical experts out there to really support, help evaluate the technology, help startups understand, how do you transfer this technical knowledge into what is needed practically. So I think for this particular group of startups, more than ever, you really need a strong ecosystem combined of deep technical experts, investors obviously, but corporates, investors, deep tech experts, maybe universities, where you get the experts. So I think that ecosystem really, this is the perfect time to really get that into place and active, to mix kind of the, the research with the practical.
Anju is just voicing the concern they have. They need technical expertise for telling them keep putting money behind B2B for at least 5 to 8 years.
So maybe organizations like DSCI should do more investor education rather than customer education. So we'll put a little more focus on that. Yes, Shiv Kumar, any closing comment?
Yeah, I think NASSCOM and these bodies, I think what they need to do that they need to have these domain experts, because what happens, like, product is developed, but what is happening that a lot of startups don't know what is the right use case. So that curation of the the use cases, maybe mentoring the startups with that, I think will be one of the key where they can be classified, or there could be a framework needs to be created. Although, like as in a lot of architecture frameworks, where some of these startups need to be mapped in the NASSCOM, kind of a industry directory like they have. Similarly, the way the startups need to be mapped, that these are the technologies which could be useful for these kind of use cases in such and such domains. So I think that will give a good traction for the industry to adopt go for the start. A lot of times this matchmaking business, which a lot of agencies are doing in between, a lot of people don't trust even them as well. That I think that NASSCOM and such agencies have to come up with such a directory where based on the vertical of the industry vertical and use cases, mapping of the startups is done. That will be really very useful, I think, especially in the government sector and all everywhere as well.
So thank you, Shiv Kumar. Valid point. So we have this, at least in security and data protection privacy space, we have a concept called a use case clearinghouse. It's a big initiative. And we continuously discover use cases by talking to user organizations and subject matter experts, develop that and publish that so that a startup can cut down the cycle to do business feasibility, validation of a use case, and quickly build a startup. And also, for example, now in the current situation, we brought out a compendium of work from home use cases and startups, so that there's a ready reckoner on who are the startups who have built solutions, or who are the product companies who build solutions for work from home. I think we need to do more on that. So I think we've had a great discussion. Thank you. At the end of it, the big takeaway, I think we need to convince more customers and more investors to bet their dollars and their rupees on B2B startups, and maybe a combination of a regulatory push and investor and customer interest would have organizations of Sahir and his peer community laughing all the way to the bank. Okay, thank you. Thank you all. And thank you, Dr. Anju, for partnering with DSCI in hosting this webinar.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks to all the panelists and the attendees. And thank you, Rama. Great moderating this.
Thank you.
Really interesting topic. Thank you all.
Thank you, Swapnendu, Shiv Kumar, and Sahir.